Collapse is imminent. It's been collapsing for the last several years. Go back through my channel. I've said a lot of things. Probably 99% of them are absolutely accurate. I'm not tooting my own horn here, I'm just trying to let you know. The World Economic Forum is meeting again in Davos tonight. You don't know who the World Economic Forum is? Well, that's where the phrase the Great Reset began. And then they changed it to Build Back Better. And now they're destroying the world economies. There's going to be huge food shortages. There's going to be widespread power outages. I wish you all would have listened to me all this time. I wish you would have took it to heart. Will it eventually get better? Eventually. How many years will it take? Will it take a decade? I'm gonna let you be down. I'll be right back. I'll talk to you while I'm walking the door there. There you go, girl. Have fun. There's this company called BlackRock. They've been buying up everything they can buy up. They have assets right now of $7 trillion. They have so much influence with the banking systems and with countries and governments that they probably control $30 trillion. And they're running scared because we're on to them. They're backing up. They're actually having to defend themselves. Instead of out there with their chest out, they're starting to cower. But it's too fucking late. And I can tell you why it's too fucking late. They're too far along. And they realize that they're not going to win this in the long run. So they're going to burn this motherfucker to the ground. Hi, clear my throat there. See, they don't want you having any individual freedoms. At one point I thought this was the push towards communism, and then after that I thought maybe it was a push towards Marxism from the left and from these bastards. But it's actually fascism.
I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered climes.
Y'all should have been listening to Glenn Beck.
My friend had told me of him.
Googling. Well, don't Google him. DuckDuckGo. Do a search for him. Fuck Google. I can tell you so many horror stories about Google, it's not even funny. I can tell you so many horror stories about social media and what they're doing to you. Let's just take TikTok, for instance. All right, it's controlled by China. It's one of the larger platforms on the fucking planet right now. These people go through the backgrounds, just like AI is going to go through the background right here. They're going to look at everything I have behind me. They're already going through every video I ever did, if they haven't already done it. I've tried not to give them a lot of information. When I bank, it's always been cash transactions. I haven't left any credit card traces. Burner accounts for every fucking thing I own. Hidden assets. Whatever I could do to foil their plans. Y'all should have been doing this too, but y'all just weren't aware. And I feel so badly for you. It breaks my fucking heart to know what you all are going to go through now. This absolute fucking censorship we have going on. And not just in America, it's worldwide, but it's really America they're concerned about. Biden's going to give his little State of the Union address tonight. It's just going to be more bullshit.
I can tell, came out and
The whole thing's bullshit.
heads. And when
It's all rigged.
colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled
Everybody knows the boat's sinking.
about imposture and
Everybody knows that they've lied.
Nyarlathotep drave us all out, down the dizzy stairs, into the damp, hot, deserted midnight.
And I can take it apart piece by piece for you, but YouTube's not going to let me.
I was not afraid.
I'm lucky to get 30 views on my fucking videos. 30 views. I have 250 subs and 30 views. If I'm lucky, I get 30
The
views.
city was exactly the same.
They don't want you to hear what I'm saying.
And when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over it.
They don't want you to hear anybody
Laughed at the queer
telling the
faces
truth.
they made.
Bringing it to you.
We felt something coming down.
So maybe you can prepare a little bit. So maybe you can ease the hardship and the burden and the misery of your families.
Drifted into curious involuntary marching formations. And seemed
You might ask how it got here.
though we dared
How it got to this point.
once we looked
How did the world become so divorced from fucking reality?
with scarce a line of rusted metal to show where the
It was all by design.
and again we
It didn't just start with the World Economic Forum. It started a long time ago. It started after World War II.
on its side. When we gazed
The globalist elite have been in bed with China and Russia
tower by the river,
and every other country in this damn world.
the second tower was
Most, if not all, the world leaders,
then we split
down to the local level, are somehow, in some way, involved with this. And if they're not, they're not going to have any choice but to go along with it.
to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan
I've never seen this country
piled down a wheat choke
in the shape that it's in now.
howling with laughter that was mad.
Look at what's happening to this,
Was sent toward the open country.
what you can find on the store shelves. This is fucking by design. They don't want you to be healthy. They've been shoving crap food down you for fucking 20 years in this fucking country. Half the people in this country are fucking obese.
Trackless, inexplicable snows,
That was by design.
asunder in one direction only.
They want you unhealthy. They want you unable to fight. They don't want you to be able to think for yourself.
The column seemed very thin indeed as it plodded.
They want complete control.
I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green litten snow.
Say the wrong thing on social media,
And I thought
you get a little checkbox by your name.
of a disc
If you don't go along with BLM, you get a little checkmark by your name. If you don't support Antifa, you get a little checkmark by your name.
beckoned by those who had gone.
If you speak out about
I half floated
1 million people in concentration camps, the Uyghurs in China, you get a little checkmark by your name.
into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable,
And on and on and on.
screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious. Only the gods that were can tell.
I still have people sending me emails.
Sensitive shadow.
Here, look at this. Look at this.
That are not
Look at what I saw on Instagram. Look at what I saw on Facebook. Oh, look at this shit on TikTok.
corpses of dead
Y'all weren't listening to me.
sores that were cities.
I wish you were.
Winds
You know, I kind of resent the fact that you fucking weren't listening to me. Honest to God, it makes me fucking angry that you just couldn't take an honest motherfucker's word at what he was saying.
monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples,
And you went ahead
from nameless rocks beneath space,
and you did as you damn well pleased
dizzy vacuum,
because you didn't take the time to do the research. You didn't take time to gather data. You didn't take time to actually rationally sit down and figure out where this fucking shit was going.
the muffled
And you should have.
beating of drums, and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes,
All this fucking wokeness.
conceivable
All this be less white shit.
beyond time, the detestable
All this racial division.
piping,
The-
whereunto dance
The liberals and the left have been sowing in this country for the last 40 fucking years.
tenebrous ultimate gods, the blind
You don't even have any idea what real history is.
mind
The real history of this country is the Democrats were the Confederacy. The Democrats were the Ku Klux Klan.
in your love.
The Democrats shitholes is why the West Coast and all the red and all the blue states are Miserable. Fucking hellholes.
Эта запись проекта LibriVox находится в общественном достоянии. Продавцы шпаг.
Can't have plastic straws, but you can damn sure make a million fucking needles for fucking San Francisco, can't you?
1917
You can spend $20,000 a piece on fucking polycarts for San Francisco Bay Area, but you can't solve the homeless problem. They want the fuckers' homeless problem. You can't.
освобожденный приказом Духонина, двинулся к далекому югу, пробиваясь
All them,
огневой
that 2.5 to 3 million people that let over the border, those are your replacements.
с вязкими грунтами Полесья. В кургузой тройке, смазных сапогах, во втором классе едва ползущего скорого,
And YouTube with their fucking, for the latest information
мовавший вагон
about COVID-19.
А ну, почтенный купец,
Hear from the experts. When you said, look at that shit.
форме с солдатскими
I'm gonna,
документами изображал денщика при собственном адъютанте. Остальные быховские узники разбежались, кто куда и кто как изловчился.
yeah. But people like myself aren't allowed to speak.
Быховский
People like you aren't allowed to speak.
последний верховный
People that know the truth aren't allowed to speak.
решительности ходил,
Not on any social media platform.
которым год назад царь совещал
Not a fucking one.
о плане весеннего наступления. Георгиевский кавалер, стоявший на часах у главного хода, видел в полуосвещенном окне стройный силуэт Духонина. Еще через час к заднему
I'm gonna keep doing videos, I guess.
бесшумный Роллс-Ройс, изготовленный
I mean,
по специальному
At this point, it's just gonna be holding your fucking hand while the world descends into fucking chaos because that's what they want. They fucking want it chaos. They want everybody at each other's throat.
вышел на крыльцо, направился к автомобилю, занес ногу на подножку каретки,
Collapse is imminent.
резко повернулся.
Total collapse is imminent.
Вызванному дежурному офицеру Верховный сообщил, что
The only hope is that someday the sun will rise and this will all be over.
приезда Крыленки с матросами. Одновременно он приказал не оказывать никакого сопротивления.
Hang on. It's gonna be a rough fucking ride.
Псов изуродованный труп
I wish you well. I love you all.
товарный вагон.
I'll be back if
Матрос
they let me.
Бельчик